Morning, welcome everyone. You're in the Mentorship Roles and Responsibility panel. I'd like to first honor and acknowledge that we're on Ganawagi traditional territory, so Chi-miigwech for hosting us. I'm Jamie Isaac, Anishinaabe British from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm a member of the Saugeen First Nation. I'm the Secretary of the Board of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective. On behalf of the board and myself, we are honored to be here and thrilled to have you participate in the 6th colloquium. I have a problem with saying that word, so forgive me if I keep stumbling on it as we go. I'd like to welcome and introduce our panel members, Jennifer Bowen-Allen, Tarah Hogue, and Sherry Knowles. With this colloquium, we further our mandate of developing and disseminating curatorial practices, innovative research, and critical discourses on Aboriginal arts and culture, as stated in the program. The name of the conference, I'm going to get this wrong, Igwe Arde. It is the Ganawagi word for we remember. One of the visions with this was to think of ways to keep contemporary Indigenous arts memory alive and accessible. And one way to do this is through mentorship, by way of sharing knowledge and passing down memories and experiences to build upon a legacy of Indigenous art history. One of my mentors, Kathy Mattis, graciously elected me onto the board at the Ottawa Colloquia. And it's been an honor to work and to learn with my fellow board members. As an emerging curator, I wanted to advocate and provide opportunities for other emerging curators. So an emerging curators caucus committee had formed. And it's in the ACC mandate to advocate on behalf of Aboriginal curators, critics, artists, and representatives of arts and cultural organizations. The ACC has created residency mentorships, micro-mentorships, one of which is present on our ACC website, and it's an exhibition called Attesting Resistance from Logan McDonald and mentored by Stephen Loft. And also in anticipation for another exhibition, which is from one of our panelists, Jennifer Bowen, at the end of October. We're looking forward to that. And also to coincide with this colloquium, the ACC developed team mentorships that provided exhibitions, which is, there's more information in your program catalog. Mentoring is widely recognized as a significant factor that can enhance skills and interpersonal development. Mentoring builds a lineage of memory through sharing knowledge that is not written about or is inaccessible. Indigenous mentorships in the arts is sharing of experience and knowledge of cultural and institutional protocols and motivations. Mentor-mentee relationships are important for bestowing the knowledge of the past and present, teaching and unlearning. And it's important to bring their valuable experiences to the fore as well as remembering important work. It's also about respecting the path carved out by those frontrunners and carrying on as memory keepers of the oral, written, and experienced knowledge. And this is honoring a living archive through relationships and people. So this panel will explore the roles and responsibilities of mentors and mentees, consider best practices that help to bridge generation gaps between Indigenous curators, in a path toward the creation of an inclusive, indigenized, and decolonized art history, Indigenous art history. These panelists have created presentations that will share with us their experiences, perspectives, and ideas around mentorship and significant mentee-mentor relationships and outcomes. Okay, so Tarah Hogue is a writer and curator of Dutch Métis ancestry. Born in Red Deer, Alberta, she received her BA in art history from Queen's University in 2008 and her MA in critical and curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia in 2012. Her practicum exhibition, Facing the Animal, was held at the Orr Gallery in 2012 and focused on animal imagery in contemporary art, comparing post-humanist and Indigenous ontologies. During her studies, Hogue co-curated No Windows, the first group exhibition at the Satellite Gallery in Vancouver in 2011. After graduating, Hogue curated 2 exhibitions about the history and the legacy of Indian residential schools in Canada. Witnesses, Art, and Canada's Indian Residential Schools at the Morris and Helen Belkin Art Gallery, and Netev, Going Out of the Darkest at Malaspina Printmakers, Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and the Urban Aboriginal Fair Trade Gallery in 2013. In 2009, she co-funded the GAM Gallery, an exhibition space and artist studio located in Vancouver's downtown east side. Hogue is also the current curatorial resident at Grunt Gallery, where she's working on exhibitions, programming, and researching on the topic of Indigenous feminism. So welcome Tarah to the stand.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much to the Curatorial Collective for inviting me to speak with you today. I couldn't be more excited to be here. And I'm going to be speaking this morning about my experience as a co-curator on the Witnesses exhibition at the Belkin Art Gallery, which took place from September 1st to December 6th of 2013. I was the youngest member of a curatorial team of 7, and I had a number of mentorship opportunities throughout the course of the year leading up to the exhibition opening. Overall, I would say that my experience of working on this exhibition was one in which those of higher standing within the institution gave over a great deal of their authorial and institutional power to those involved with the project, including the participating artists and myself, among others. So this required the team to meet, to listen to, and to work with a host of collaborators from different organizations on everything from protocol to education to health support. And the result in my mind was an exhibition that first and foremost took into account the needs of its artists and of creating a supportive environment for them as well as for the gallery's public, which in this case included students from the secondary to graduate levels, university scholars, residential school survivors, and others. Witnesses saw the highest attendance numbers in the gallery's history, by far, and I think that this was due to both the sensitivity and openness of the curatorial process, as well as the power of the art in the exhibition, of course, and a broader mobilization by the university to bring attention to the residential school history around the time that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was happening in Vancouver. First, I should back up a bit to give you a bit of the backstory. So that's Scott Watson, the director of the Belkin Art Gallery and head of the Department of Art History and Visual Arts at UBC. In 2011, Scott attended a dialogue on the history and legacy of Indian residential schools at the First Nations House of Learning on UBC campus. At the meeting's conclusion, Hereditary Chief of the Gwawinook First Nation, Chief Robert Joseph, asked those present if they could act to raise awareness about the history and legacy of the residential schools. And this is where the idea for the Witnesses exhibition came to be, as a response to a request. Scott organized a curatorial team of 7, which is quite unusual for the Belkin, who normally works with 1 to 2 curators for their shows. And the team included Jeff Carr, who is a PhD candidate, now graduate, who wrote his thesis on residential school architecture, Dana Claxton, visual artist and professor at UBC, Shelley Rosenblum, who I unfortunately don't have a picture of, who is the curator of academic programs at the gallery, Charlotte Townsend Galt, art history professor at UBC, there she is with Lawrence, and Keith Wallace, who's in the red shirt, the associate director of the Belkin, as well as Scott Watson and myself. So I had recently graduated from the Curatorial Studies program at UBC when I started this exhibition. So I had already received a lot of mentorship while working at the Belkin as a work study student for the past 2 years, as well as from team members like Scott and Charlotte, who were advisors on my practicum. So the time spent on the Witnesses exhibition was a continuation of an already established mentorship that was taking place over a long period of time, which I think really speaks to the necessity of having those sustained type of relations in nurturing emerging practices. Still, when I began work on the exhibition, I was surprised by how empowered my role was, despite being the youngest team member. The team had some ideas of potential artists that they wanted to work with, and my role was to put together research presentations of the suggested names, but I was welcome and free to bring new ideas to the table. And as the person leading up this initial phase of the research, I found that I had a great deal of input into the decision-making process. Each of the team members brought their own areas of knowledge and significant insight to the process. And there was a lot of debate and discussion, and this part of the planning stage certainly took the longest in the exhibition's planning. And I always felt that my voice was heard and considered seriously. Over a number of discussions and presentations of research, the curatorial team came to the decision that it would, of course, be impossible to present an exhaustive exhibition of art about residential schools, and thought that it would be more effective to try and represent artists from across nations as well as from across generations in order to create a dialogue among a multiplicity of voices, as well as creating a multiplicity of experiences for visitors to the gallery. It was also felt that the inclusion of non-Indigenous voices was important to point to the fact that this discussion needs to happen between both the settler and Indigenous populations of Canada, and that the responsibility for bringing these issues to light should not be placed solely on the shoulders of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So there were artists that we approached that had reservations about participating in the exhibition for this reason and others. But the overwhelming response we had was that the artists felt that it was an important step to take to share their experiences and viewpoints, which I think is confirmed by the fact that there have been very few exhibitions about this topic. In light of this, I would say that the work of certain artists in the exhibitions also became my mentors as well. Early on in the research process, I connected with the work of Joan Cardinal Schubert. Like me, Joan was raised in Alberta, and her family's presence in the city of Red Deer and elsewhere is still felt in many of its buildings that were designed by Joan's brother, Douglas Cardinal. Joan was a trailblazer for Indigenous women in Canada, and I learned a lot from spending time with her work and reading about her experiences as a young woman growing up in the province and trying to find her artistic voice in an environment that didn't often want to recognize its merits. I saw a lot of parallels with my own experience growing up in a very conservative place. And of course, Joan persevered and ultimately succeeded in sharing her art with many people across Canada, as well as being an active teacher and speaker for Indigenous rights. And this is her work, The Lesson, and it's an early example of artwork, especially performance artwork, dealing with the topic of residential schools. When she presented this work, she would ask for First Nations members of the audience to come forward and participate in the performance by speaking about their memories of residential school. And this would often happen without much advance notice. So it would create a situation where there was a lot of outpouring of emotion and memories that many people might not have experienced since they were children. And for myself, I was fortunate to be raised with the privilege that comes from my own European heritage. And in my experience, I found that my Métis heritage has created opportunities for me rather than hindering them. I didn't have the same struggles as Joan, and I feel very lucky because of that, to be given these opportunities to be trusted and supported by my teachers and coworkers in ways that enable me to affect some kind of change through my work, even within the limited scope of the art gallery. I look to Joan as a mentor because she was someone that overcame her adversities and because she was an incredibly brave woman to do the type of work that she did. So my role as a mentee makes me acutely aware of the responsibility I have to others as a result of the opportunity that I've been given. And I think that everyone in the Witnesses Project felt the same way. So the Belkin is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam Nation, as well as being on the campus of UBC, a university with thousands of students from around the globe, many of whom have no idea about the residential school history, never mind the general Canadian public who is often ill-informed about this as well. So we therefore wanted to approach our audience with both mindfulness and generosity. And to this end, we listed a number of additional mentors that helped to guide the project. These included the Musqueam liaison for UBC, Leona Sparrow, health workers from the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, including Alvin Dixon, Chief Robert Joseph, who represented Reconciliation Canada, and others. I was often overwhelmed with the level of positivity and generosity to share with others that these people showed to us, key qualities for any mentor, of course. And in our discussions with them, they urged us to not beat our audience over the head, so to speak, with messages about how terrible the residential schools were, victimizing its survivors, and instead wanted us to show how far our people have come since that time, despite the genocide that was enacted upon us. So in light of this, we physically bookended the exhibition with 2 video works. This by Lisa Jackson, called Savage, and Touch Me by Skeena Reese. These videos, in very different ways, allowed viewers to pause and reflect on moments of agency, of survivance, of healing, and even forgiveness, though importantly on a personal rather than a national level. The exhibition also had some incredibly difficult works, of course, as ultimately we were guided by the experience and vision of the artist that we were working with. So Gina Lang was referred to us by Ron Hamilton, whose ceremonial curtains had been exhibited at the Belkin in 2010, which was a show that was organized by one of the curatorial team members. Gina completed a number of drawings in the 90s when she was doing therapy about the abuse that she suffered at the Alberni Residential School. And the works, they kind of sat in an uncomfortable position within the gallery because it's a space that's always trying to force the frame of artwork upon everything that's happening inside of it. And these were the most visceral images in the exhibition, and Gina was very sensitive as to how the images were discussed and circulated. We didn't include the images in the exhibition catalog, and I'm showing you an image of Gina instead of showing you an image of her work. So Keith Wallace and myself were the main points of contact between the gallery and the artists. So we had a lot of discussions about how to best approach working with Gina along with other artists in the exhibition that had experienced trauma directly or intergenerational trauma from the residential schools. Gina had previously worked with Andrea Walsh at the University of Victoria. So Andrea was our point of contact between the gallery and Gina throughout the exhibition. They had established a working relationship already, and it was a more comfortable situation for her, even though Gina and I spoke over the phone a number of times. Gina had no idea of what showing her work in a gallery would be like, but for her, she felt that it was important to share her experience with others and that this was a good platform for her to do so. And Gina visited the exhibition a number of times over its duration, often unannounced, and ended up spending hours in the gallery talking to visitors and students that came to see the show about her experiences. And I can't imagine how difficult it would be for her to talk about those. I know that it was difficult for students to hear what she had to say a lot of the time, but she never hesitated, and it was really amazing to see how deeply that experience affected people. So people like Andrea Walsh and Chief Robert Joseph that we consulted with during the exhibition were very important in guiding us to build the right relationships between the artists and the gallery, following proper protocol for contact as well as for the exhibition programming. And this wouldn't have happened without their mentorship. It was a learning process for all of us that were involved, and it certainly required more time than is necessary for most exhibitions, but it also yielded some serious fruit, I think. This included a wide variety of programs, outreach, and education around the show. We toured classes through the exhibition constantly, and some of the artists, as well as the staff at the Belkin, would go out into the community to talk to students. I assisted in programming a symposium called Traumatic Histories, Artistic Practice, and Working from the Margins, which we also broadcast online. Making our programming accessible was very important to the curatorial team. And to this end, we published a PDF version of the catalog online for free. And you can watch the symposium online still as well. We also held artist talks with Kathy Busby, Bo Dick, Jamasi Pitsilak, whose work is shown here, Tanya Willard, whose work is shown here, as well as performances, including one by Peter Moran, whose two-part work was a temporal bookend to the beginning and end of the exhibition, which was an intensely personal journey for all of us that were involved with it. So the title of the exhibition, Witnesses, really exemplifies for me my experience of working on the exhibition, of being mentored by curators, academics, artists and their work, educators and survivors, in ways that empowered my own actions and heightened my sense of responsibility to the people involved in the project as well as to our public. Following the literary critic Shoshana Feldman, testimony is something which is comprised of bits and pieces of memory that have not fully settled into our understanding or remembrance, which in my mind is a very apt description for the often fractured and traumatic nature of the memory of residential schools. However, these bits and pieces come together to form a record that is perhaps not unlike how oral histories have been maintained and passed on to new generations. The burden to witness and to give testimony as to the significance of an event results in a collective record that unites the past and present in memory. And I want to leave you with this image of Kathy Busby's work, We Are Sorry, which was installed in one of the libraries on campus, where the audience was invited to take away a piece of the apology made by Stephen Harper, which for me illustrates something of both witnessing, testimony, and my experience as a mentee within this project. Marcy, thank you.